Welcome to Young People Speak Out. I'm Timothy Berry. One of the most frustrating problems of society today is what to do about our children who are unaccounted for. Part of the problem of missing children is the wide-ranging nature of these children. Some are missing due to criminal actions. Some are missing because they have run away. And some are missing because they are homeless and have nowhere to go. Recently in Des Moines, the Iowa Runaway, Homeless, and Missing Youth Prevention and Education Center opened. What does this group hope to accomplish that all the other organizations that went before it couldn't? We'll try to find out today. Our studio audience is from Carroll Public High School, and our panel members include Susan GEHRING, who is the coordinator of this Des Moines program. With her is Gordon Miller, who is the director of the Polk County Juvenile Shelter, and Linnell Sanders, who is director of Field Services Bureau of the Public Safety Clearinghouse. Beate, your question.
I would like to know, what are the most common reasons that young people run away?
Probably the most common reason is family stress. It may be that the young person is going through his or her teenage years and they're having a lot of problems deciding what kinds of freedoms their parents are going to allow them to have, what kinds of privileges they have, what kind of responsibilities they're going to be taking. Generally, the youth and the parent will get into some kind of conflict, and it will continue to escalate, be a bigger and bigger problem over a period of time, months or years. It reaches a point where there's no longer any communication. There may even be some physical abuse involved. The parent becomes angry and hits the child, the young person. And at that point, the young person feels that he has no other alternative but to leave the household and run away.
Susan, let's pick on you for a minute. What do you hope that your organization will accomplish that, say, all the organizations like Gordon's have not been able to do so far?
One of the things that we're focused on, and actually the primary focus of this, is to work on prevention. And we've done a lot in the area of providing temporary shelter, programs for kids after they've left home. But one of the big problems that we've seen is that people don't understand what leads to things like running away, that running away is not the problem in and of itself, that there are a lot of other things going on in the family, and that kids are running from something instead of to something. So our goal is to work on prevention and education, to let the people in Iowa know it's our problem. It's not just a problem in Des Moines, but kids from Carroll run away, kids from small communities throughout the state and farms run away, and that we all need to work together to do prevention. And this is somewhat of a new idea in our field. It's something that we haven't had much energy or capacity to do before.
Right. Linnell, we've been speaking here mainly of runaways, but there are other types of missing kids. What does your organization deal with?
The Department of Public Safety's Missing Person Clearinghouse deals with all missing children. They may be runaways, missing persons, but we'll address children for now. They may be runaways. They may be children who were abducted by a non-custodial parent. They may be a child that was abducted by a stranger. We deal with all types of missing children.
Okay. Scott.
How long must a minor be away from home before they're considered missing?
Iowa law, in fact, prohibits a waiting period for law enforcement agencies to act on a missing person's case if it involves a juvenile. When a parent or a legal guardian contacts a law enforcement agency, there are certain things that agency has to do immediately in order to comply with the new law.
How has that been met by the people out in the field? Does that tie up their hands a lot of times in finding people who are just getting home late from school, or has it actually cut through the red tape?
I think generally speaking, the new law has been well received by law enforcement agencies. There are some problems with repeat or habitual runaways. A lot of times these are multiple problem children, and they're going in and out of the system a lot. So that has been troublesome for law enforcement. But in general, I think the new law has been well received by law enforcement.
Okay, Kim.
Yes, I'd like to know how many runaway shelters there are in the state of Iowa.
Currently, there are 15 specific facilities that specifically handle runaways.
Is running away against the law?
No, not in the state of Iowa.
So a lot of these centers are voluntary?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Eric.
Do runaway houses get enough public funding?
Not at the current time as far as we're concerned. I guess everybody always feels like they need more money to operate, but the current amount of money that shelters in Iowa receive from the state in terms of reimbursement has not increased within the last 5 years to keep up with basic cost of living increases, inflation.
In addition, we're having to turn kids away. There are places that are full, and a kid may need a break for a night or two. you know, just some time away from home, some distance from that family. And if there aren't any beds available because there hasn't been enough funding to carry them through, there may not be a safe place for that kid to go.
All right. Lisa,
What percentage of runaways seek help through runaway houses?
good follow-up question, I think, too. Are you meeting the need might be another way of asking that question.
It is hard to say what percentage, because if they don't get to runaway shelters, we don't know how to count them. We estimate that probably just a portion of the kids, maybe a third or so, really get to a shelter. A lot of times kids leave home and go to someplace in their own community first. They may go to a friend's house, a neighbor's house, a relative, and usually exhaust those kinds of resources before they end up going directly to a shelter. Although in this area, I think Youth and Shelter Services is pretty well known, and they get a lot of kids that come directly there.
Okay. Jody.
How would you define what a runaway is?
Nationally, the term that they use is that a child who's away from home longer than overnight without permission. And that can really vary depending on how you want to look at it. But it's usually an absence without permission for past the time when you're expected to be home, those kind of things. There's no legal definition.
Excuse me, Susan. We're talking with the folks here from Carroll Public High School about the problem of missing and runaway children in Iowa. Hope you'll stay with us because there's more to come. Welcome back to Young People Speak Out. We're talking with the folks from Carroll Public High School about missing kids and runaways. And Susan gave us just a quick little definition of runaways. Linnell, what's the legal definition or the working definition that you folks have for missing people?
First of all, we consider runaways to be missing kids. We generally break children down into 3 or 4 different categories. First of all, there are involuntary disappearances. Those would be, the common terms would be abductions or kidnappings. And within the state of Iowa, we further break that down into children who have been abducted by a parent or a non-custodial parent or relative as opposed to a stranger abduction. There's also a category of endangered. Generally, this is a child who has left home on their own, but who is in the company of someone who's a threat or a danger to them. It might be a child who's with an adult pimp. It might be a child who's with a known drug abuser or somebody who's abusive. Those children would be classified as endangered. We also have a disabled category. That's for children who are either mentally or physically disabled. That could be or could include drug dependency, alcohol dependency, mental retardation, some type of other physiological incapacity. And then there's a juvenile category, which generally includes runaways, but it would be any other juvenile that didn't fit in one of those other 3 categories.
Paul.
Before you mentioned that running away wasn't against the law, if it were, do you think it would cut back on the number of runaways?
No.
It might cut back on the number of kids getting help. As now that one of the kids mentioned, so it's essentially voluntary to go get help. You can go to a shelter, you can go to a police officer and say, look, I'm having problems at home, I need a break, I need some assistance. If it were illegal, kids would be even more hesitant to approach police, certainly, because they could then lock them up, and also with shelters, because then they've committed a crime. And running away from a situation that somebody finds difficult to deal with or problems at home is really not something that should be against the law. It used to be, and it is still in some states.
Gordon, how much authority does your organization have to hold juveniles? Are you, somewhat of a detention area, or what's your relationship with you and law enforcement agencies?
All of the children that are placed with the Polk County Juvenile Home are placed under the jurisdiction of the Polk County Juvenile Court. That means that there's been some sort of crisis in the youth's life, whether it's a family problem, runaway, or abandonment, neglect, something like that, that has required the court to become involved and actually care for the child on a short-term basis. So we have authority to hold them. We are not a detention center in that we do not have locks on our doors, and at least on a day-to-day basis, it's a voluntary thing for the kids to stay there. They know that they can walk out the door at any time. There are no locks, so there's nothing really to keep them there physically.
All right. Marty?
What kind of counseling does a runaway and their parents get?
If they're involved with the courts, they will probably receive family counseling from a private therapist or a community mental health center or some other type of person who is trained to deal with children and parents who are having problems in the family.
Okay. Beth?
How do you distinguish between a runaway and an abducted child?
A runaway child would be a child who has voluntarily left the home due to the circumstances in the home. An abducted child would be a child who was taken by a stranger or possibly by a non-custodial parent and didn't go of their own free will, and that the custodial parent did not give permission for that child to be with that individual.
Now, you'd also talked about endangered children, children who were with pimps or drug pushers and that kind of thing. Do you find children who are in that endangered category that appear to be there because of their own free will?
Oftentimes children may be with an adult who is not the best person for them to be with. They may perceive that being with that individual is better than being in a home situation. For instance, maybe a girl or a boy who's been sexually abused in the home may leave that home situation and then end up on the streets exploited by another adult. They may perceive that situation to be better than the situation than was at home. So they may go with them voluntarily.
Yeah, Susan.
They also may not feel like they can go back. Some of the things we've heard from kids who've been involved in prostitution, got involved in it inadvertently, and have been there, is that the people who keep them there say, nobody would want you if you went home. Your parents aren't going to love you anymore. Nobody's going to like you. Look at the awful things that you've done. And kids tend to believe that. That message may be very incorrect. There's probably somebody back there wanting to hear from them and willing to work with them, but sometimes kids hear that message.
Okay. Jay?
What should a person do if they know someone who is a runaway?
One of the things I would do is to talk to them. If you know they're going to run away, or if you know they have run away, which, either way?
Either.
Okay. If you know that somebody's thinking about it, or that they're really going to, one of the things I would urge you to do is to talk to them about staying in touch with somebody, whether it's a parent or whether it's you, whether it's somebody who knows that they're safe. It's really important to have that contact with somebody who knows you're okay. You may not choose to tell them where you're at or exactly where you're going, but keep in touch with somebody, because as long as there's a connection to somebody, you have a better chance of survival than if you're out there on the streets and nobody knows that you're there. Your chances of survival go down if you don't have that connection. And I would talk to them about that.
Okay. James?
Yeah, how are runaways treated by their peers on their return home?
I think that's going to vary depending upon your community and how you look at it. I think it's real important just to, remain friends and talk to them about what's going on. Give them some support for what probably was a real tough situation for them.
Also, how about, how does their family treat them?
I think it depends on whether the family gets any assistance or not. Sometimes kids come home and the family doesn't get any counseling and the kids don't get any counseling, and the situation doesn't necessarily change. And I think that a lot of times leads to some repeat running away, because it's still an effort to make things change, and if there isn't anybody there to listen and help them change some of their roles and what they're doing.
I think the statistics make it look like this is occurring more and more, but are we as a society getting better at treating either causes or solutions to the effect or anything? Is our approach to maybe James's question here, do we, look at the family and say, well, maybe they aren't just I'm thinking that the old think used to be that it was a bad family. Are we advancing as a society that maybe we think, well, that could happen to anybody?
Hopefully we're becoming more attuned to the fact that kids run away for a reason, that there is some sort of stress. I think traditionally we've tended to look at runaway kids as bad kids who just were lazy or defiant and just didn't want to be parented. And I think more and more we're realizing that there were some serious problems there, particularly in the areas of physical and sexual abuse, that until a few years ago we really didn't take seriously and weren't very aware of.
Okay, Kurt.
Do you feel a runaway child should be forced back to the home, and why?
No. I think that and most of the places we try to get the child back home, if that makes sense. If the parents are interested and willing and the child is interested. There are times when the home situation may not be the best place, and you may need either a temporary or a long-term separation from that situation. Just to say, go back home and we'll treat you just like we always did, would not necessarily solve the problem. So we do our best to reunite families, but also work with them and work with the child for everybody's best interest.
All right, we're talking with the folks from Carroll Public School about missing kids and runaways. We hope you'll stay with us because there's more to come. Welcome back to Young People Speak Out. We're talking with the folks from Carroll Public School about missing kids and runaways. And Tammy, your question.
Statistics show that more girls run away than boys. What reasons can you give for this?
I think in general, in Iowa, first of all, it's about double. For instance, on the missing persons list that came out on Monday, there were 52 boys who were reported missing and 104 girls. So it was about double. One reason, I think, is sexual abuse. There are more girls than boys that are sexually abused, and so there would be more girls who would have that reason to leave the home. I think there's probably some other things that parents seem to watch girls and their actions a little more, so there may be naturally a little more set up for conflict with a girl.
I think another reason may be the fact that in this society, it seems that boys are allowed to be more physical, more verbal about conflicts that they have with their parents or other people. They're more likely to fight back and to lash out. Females, on the other hand, still kind of tend to be kind of quiet and don't share their feelings as much with other people. Instead, they just run away.
Okay. Lisa.
What percentage of runaways return home?
You never hear about the kids that return home. That's an excellent question. During the first day, or within 24 hours, about 40% of the kids come home. And by the end of a week, in excess of 70% are home. And after a month, about 95, 98% of the kids are back home. So there are a lot of kids who are running away and returning home, and then they may leave again. But the return rate is very good.
Jay's question before about what should you do if you know of somebody who is a missing person. You folks said you wanted to expound on that a little bit, about the networking system that's available. Who wants to take off?
Definitely. Well, Susan Center obviously is a good place to start. As we mentioned before, there are 15 runaway shelters or shelters for kids in crisis in the state of Iowa. This means that almost every major community has one. Every community or county seat practically has a mental health center where you can walk in and talk to someone about your problem. There are lots of folks available who may be sympathetic. You can talk to a high school guidance counselor, you can talk to a favorite teacher, you can talk to a pastor or a priest. You can go to the parent of a friend who is someone that you trust. Ask for their advice, maybe share some information with them and ask where you can get help. In all cases, there is help available. There are places you can go. There's also a national runaway switchboard number, which is 1-800-621-4000. And if you are completely out of ideas as to where to go, you can call that number and tell them what the problem is, and maybe they can refer you to someone in the state of Iowa who can help you.
There are some businesses that are helping in that effect too, isn't it? You mentioned one of the bus lines?
Yes, Trailways has a program where they will pay for the bus ticket or supply a bus ticket to a missing or a runaway child to return home, and that's an excellent program.
That's to return home. That's not just to get someplace
That's not just to go anywhere.
Okay, John.
Under whose jurisdiction does a runaway fall under after he's run away?
Under whose jurisdiction? Good question.
Since it isn't a crime, it really wouldn't be under anybody's jurisdiction. If the child were being victimized in the home, it would fall under the jurisdiction of the Department of Human Services or a human service agency that would investigate that type of situation.
A lot of our concern might disappear once that child reaches 18, but do the problems disappear at that time too, or do you folks lose control or certainly wouldn't lose interest in them, but I mean, is there something magical about that age 18?
They become legal adults, and technically they're free to do what they want to do, and if they choose to leave the state of Iowa and go anywhere, they can do that.
The Missing Persons Information Clearinghouse deals not only with juveniles but with adults, and in our computer system we maintain files on adults who ran away when they were children and haven't returned yet. Nationwide there is a problem with unidentified bodies or unidentified people who are deceased, and they are left in the computer system in a hope of matching up some of those. I believe in New York City alone they have somewhere around 5,500 unidentified bodies. Some of those are missing kids from Iowa or missing people who were missing children from Iowa or from other states. So we deal with both.
Okay. Therese.
How long does the law keep looking for a runaway?
Generally speaking, first of all, it would depend on the circumstances. If somebody is voluntarily missing and they turn 18, then law enforcement agencies probably are going to be less likely to continue to actively look for the person. The case, however, probably would not be closed at that point. Again, we do continue to maintain those files in our computer system, and were that individual to be stopped in another state on a routine traffic stop or whatever, then the fact that they were missing would come up through that check.
Okay, we're talking with the folks here from Carroll Public High School about missing kids and runaways. We hope you'll stay with us because there's more to come. Welcome back to Young People Speak Out. Christy, your question.
What do they do with a runaway who has been abused at home?
They will, if the court gets involved, they will place the runaway in, or the child, the runaway, the youth, in a safe setting. It could be with a relative, such as a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle. It could be in a foster home with a foster family, or it could be in a shelter facility.
But you don't necessarily send them back to the parent.
Usually not right away until some counseling is done with the family.
Jack.
Do you think running away should always be considered negative?
Oh, no.
Sometimes it's a real self-protective behavior. Sometimes you need to get out of the situation and take a break. Not always that you need to stay away, but you need to go to a safe place. Don't run away and hit the streets. Run away to some place that's safe.
And then go back and work on the problem.
Right.
Didn't you also say there are usually a couple of preliminary runaways before a big jump like leaving town or something? Kim, your question.
What percentage of runaways end up as victims of foul play?
That would be hard to say because we don't know where those kids are.
But you would think that their chances would increase if...
Definitely.
If they don't find a safe place.
Mike.
What's the average age of a runaway?
I would say between 13 and 15 years of age.
The greatest, probably about 75% are 15, 16, 17. And I believe nationally it's around 15% in the 13 and 14-year-old age group.
Okay. Todd.
When a child does run away, is there generally more pressure on a parent or on the child?
I think that probably depends a lot on the family situation. Some parents really find it difficult. Others kind of take it in stride. May not be all that concerned. So it really varies. I think the kid's facing a lot of pressure at that point in time because they're choosing to put themselves in some kind of danger possibly to get out of the situation they're in.
Okay. Paul.
How important is a runaway house in getting the child back home?
I think it's real important that the kids get someplace, at least that they'll get listened to, and that there's an effort made to work with the family and to see that, you know, the best fit possible happens.
Okay. And Chris.
How are these runaway houses financed?
Combination of private and public funding. We get private donations, but we also receive money from state, federal governments.
We're down to about 30 seconds left in the show. Any area we haven't touched on here yet?
I did want to mention, we do have a hotline here in Iowa. The number's 1-800-346-5507. And if you have any questions about missing persons, you can call that number.
We'd like to thank you folks for being on our panel today. It's been most enlightening. We'd like to thank the folks from Carroll Public High School for coming over and joining us today. And we'd like to thank you and hope you'll join us next week on Young People Speak Out.